Hi there, I'm Dave Litton, and first of all, a very warm welcome to my brand new APMP Project Management Qualification Primer. It's been designed to allow you to prepare for the APMP Project Management Qualification exam in your own time and at your own pace. As you can probably gather from this first opening screen, my primer has been designed into a series of video modules, this one being the first. Each module comes with an accompanying handbook and module exercises based on the official syllabus. Each of these exercises represents a part of a typical exam-style question, but does not, in and of itself, constitute a typical full exam question. However, don't worry, as these serve as a powerful revision aid to keep check on each topic's comprehension, as well as an opportunity to practice your exam-taking skills. You see, included with my primer, you have multiple full-strength, typical exam questions in the form of sample exam papers to test both your knowledge and exam time management. So next, a quick overview of what you will be getting with my APMP Project Management Qualification Primer, as well as some exam guidance before introducing you to the first topics. So a warm welcome to you and congratulations, you have taken action and started on your first step to passing your APM Project Management Qualification examination. So I want to start off by giving you some advice and guidance about the exams themselves. So first, do make sure that you carry out and practice the following key points. 1. I want you to watch and review all of the video modules in module order. 2. You will want to complete the exam-style exercises at the end of each workbook module. As I've already said, these are exam-style exercises, although they would not, in and of themselves, constitute a full typical exam question. 3. You need to practice writing out your exam-style exercise answers. Now, this is very important, and I really do recommend that once you've printed out the accompanying handbooks, you get yourself a good quality black or blue pen, plus a bound writing pad. In the exam itself, you'll only be allowed to use a black or blue pen, so it makes sense to choose one that you're familiar with and comfortable with to practice your exam-style answers. Number 4, having done that, go back and review the relevant video sections for any of your weaker syllabus areas. You may find that in carrying out these exercises, that one or more particular topics that have been covered, that you have not quite grasped all of the key aspects of one or more of the topics. So this is your opportunity to go back and review each section before moving on to the next module. Number 5, make sure you print out your APM Project Management Qualification exam cram. Add it to your workbooks and take notes as you read thoroughly. The exam cram is helpful as it clearly identifies the learning criteria for each subtopic. 6. Take my full-strength sample APM exams under 3-hour exam conditions. I'll be advising you in the next few moments exactly what we mean by the exam conditions. And number 7, based on your sample exam scores, as in point 6 above, review any relevant video modules. So you'll find yourself going back to your video modules probably at least twice, once when carrying out your exam-style exercises, and second at your first attempt of trying my sample APMP exam questions themselves. So, what exactly is the exam and syllabus for the APM Project Management Qualification exam? This particular set of videos is based on the very latest APM Body of Knowledge 6th edition. So each exam consists of 3 hours, which will include reading time. Be aware that it will be an essay-style paper. In other words, you'll need to write the answers into the exam answer booklet provided. It's a closed book exam, so you are not allowed to take any information in with you, either in the form of books or notes. You can only use a blue or black pen, and you will find there are 16 questions, out of which you must answer any 10. Now each question carries 50 marks, And although the Association for Project Management does not publish exactly what the pass mark is, we believe it's around 60%. So because each question carries 50 marks and you must answer any 10, your choice, then therefore the maximum score is 500, and that means you need about 275 marks out of the 500 available. There are two ways you can sit the exam. One is by attending a classroom accredited course and sitting the exam at the end of that course, or by self-study and sitting the exam at an APM Open Exam Centre. If you wish to find out more about this and where the nearest exam centres are, then you can go onto Google and you'll be able to find that information fairly easily. So let's look at the full APM Project Management Qualification syllabus itself. There are in total 37 topics, and I've listed them here. However, I won't go through them all, since I'm sure you can read as well as I can. Structure of organisations and projects, project lifecycle, and so on. But what I will do is take you through the 40 video modules that are included within my primer. Module 1 through to Module 7 introduces you to project management. We're actually looking at Module 1 right now, of course. Module 2 brings in program and portfolio, project context, and so on and so forth. Module 8 to 13 introduces project life cycles, success and benefits, and includes health and safety and environment. Very often courses cover this at the very end, and I think that's a mistake, since health and safety and environment are very important aspects that you need to put into context. So it's best to cover this before you go into other topics such as project scheduling, estimating, risk management, and so on. Module 14 brings in project requirements onto scope management and through to estimating, scheduling, and resource management. Module 22 and 23 covers risk and issue management. You will notice here, sometimes because a particular topic contains quite a lot of information, I've split it into 2 or even 3 modules. Earned value is an example here. Finishing off, Module 31 on information management, right the way through to the final module, which again is split into 2. That's Module 39 and 40 on leadership. Now, I did advise you to cover these modules in number order, and that would certainly be true for the first half a dozen or a dozen of them. However, because you may wish to watch these when you get an opportunity for a spare moment, you may want to take some of these in different order than I've laid them out here. And that, of course, is up to you, since we all learn differently, and it's important to consider when you best learn during a day or a weekend. So here's my step-by-step study strategy I recommend for my APM Project Management Qualification Primer. Number 1, directly you've downloaded all these files, create a folder on your PC or Mac, desktop or notebook, whichever you're using, for all of the videos and documents. This will help you easily access it. And as I say, I'd recommend putting it on your desktop so you can easily find it. Number 2, print out your workbook and the exam cram and the sample exam papers. Although, to be fair, you probably shouldn't be looking at these until you've finished all modules. Point 3, I suggest you watch the videos in number sequence for your first view, but as I've already said, after you've watched the first half dozen or so, you may wish to jump ahead and look at particular topics, depending on the time and availability you've got to study. You may well want to watch each video a second time, but this time take notes before moving on to the next video. That, of course, is again entirely your choice. Step 5. Carry out the exercises at the end of each module before going on to the next module, writing answers in your notepad. You see, this will give you 2 things. Number 1, it'll test your understanding of the video module you've just watched. And second, it will also give you valuable exam practice. You see, it may well be some time since you've last had to write using a pen and paper. Like most of us, we're probably used to answering our emails and creating documents electronically on our computers. And believe me, having to write for 3 hours can be quite a strain on your hand and fingers if you haven't done it for some time. So getting used to writing answers will be a valuable exercise as well as preparing you better for the actual real live exam. Number 6, set the sample exam papers that I've included, note any weaker areas, and then rewatch the relevant videos. Okay, next up, let's have a look at some exam guidelines. Okay, the next 4 slides, I want to show you some aspects that I've called exam guidance overview. These particular topics which I'll be bringing up is feedback from the examiners themselves, since they've been kind enough to share this. And I suspect these next 4 slides you'll want to come back to at the very end of your studying before you take the real exam. I was considering covering this at the very end, but I think knowing it up front before you study the actual topics we're going to cover will be most helpful to you. First up, a positive approach. The APM want new members and they actually want you to pass. So give them the evidence to show that you are worthy. It's very easy when you go into an exam and feeling nervous. That's quite natural. I always do. I'm sure you will. But be aware they're on your side. They're not there to trick you, to stop you from joining. They actually want you to pass. Now you'll find the exam questions typically ask you for 2 or 3 aspects of a particular topic. And for each point that the question asks for, number and separate each of them. For example, in a real question, you may have part A, part B, and part C. Don't just run your answers into one endless stream. Good exam practice, as always, is make each point or sentence or paragraph and then leave a space, a blank line, before writing the next piece. But when it comes to answering part A or B or C, clearly show the examiner which is A and which is B and which is C. Read the candidate notes from the APM website. I'll be pointing you to where you can find those later. You need to allow 15 minutes for each question. And it's important to start each question on a new page. Get used to doing that with your pad of paper. Number each question, and indeed each part question, as I've already mentioned. And use good time management and time box answers. Now you may have wondered why I said 15 minutes for each question. Well, this comes down to good time management. Since you've got to read all the questions at the start of the exam and decide which questions you're going to answer and which ones you will leave, you may even want to give each question a simple scoring system, such as marks out of 10, to see which topics you feel most confident about. However, you'll need to leave time for reading those questions and making your choice, and at the end of the exam, it would be a good thing to have a few minutes left over to go back and check and make sure that you've answered all of the questions correctly. So allowing 15 minutes for each question is a good strategy. If you find yourself spending 20 minutes on an early question, it's highly likely that you'll run out of time and you will not be able to complete the last question that you answer. Write on one side of the page only, as well as starting each question on a new page. Don't write on the back. Leave extra space at the end, as it may be possible to add more information later when you go back and review any questions. What you had forgotten or couldn't think of when answering the question may come to you, and it's nice just to have some space where you can quickly scribble in some extra points. Those may make all the difference between a pass and a fail. Skim read each question and note questions you feel confident about. As I've said, consider using a simple marks out of 10 to quickly prioritise which questions you should answer. Now, what's coming up next is fairly obvious, but please make a note. Avoid alcohol. Certainly the night before. The old adage of go to bed early and get up early is a good one here. Arrive early. Plan your trip to arrive at least 15 to 30 minutes before the exam starts. There's an advantage here is that you can select, therefore, a good seat. I remember when I took my exam, it was during summer, and sitting by the window, the sun was streaming through, but because I'd turned up early, I managed to sit in the shade. Of course, also arriving early, it allows you to mentally prepare. Grab a cup of coffee or tea or whatever, or a glass of water, and you're ready to start. When it comes to answering your questions, make brief points. The examiner is usually looking for a simple, straightforward answer, even if you have to make several points. Use bullets wherever appropriate. The examiner's very happy if you use bullets, and it'll often mean that you don't have to write so much supporting text around each part of your answer. Do not write essay-style answers, as these tend to take a longer time to make similar points, with the risk of your hand, wrists, elbows and arms becoming tired before the end of the exam. Do read each question and note exactly what is being asked. I expect, much like me, you had the same advice back at school, and it's equally true as adults. I'm afraid it's the nature of us humans that we read a question and very often we read into it what we'd like to answer rather than saying exactly what is being asked. I'll give you some more advice on that in a moment. If medically acceptable, do bring energy drinks with you into the exam. You'll know the brand names I'm thinking of, but because they often have high levels of caffeine, please don't use them if you have an aversion to that or any medical condition that would mean that's a dangerous thing. But if they are something which you take from time to time and you're quite comfortable with, I really do recommend them, as you need to keep energy high throughout the exam. Continuing with our exam guidance overview. Some questions have the words explain, and when you see this, it means the examiner requires a detailed explanation of the topic in question. You should expect to write a paragraph consisting of 2 to 5 sentences for each explain aspect, perhaps including a relevant example of the point being made, if that helps prove to the examiner that you have understood that aspect of the syllabus. You will see a question type called list and describe. What the examiner is looking for here is that they want you to make a list heading followed by a paragraph of description. The list element is worth 2 marks and the description is usually worth 8 marks. So in other words, make it clear, here's the list heading I've got and here's my description. If the list element isn't clear or missing, then a maximum of 8 marks only are awarded, just for your description. You can expect to write 2 or 3 sentences to describe the listed heading. You can see now why I'm giving you this information in the first module, because as you start to practice some of the part questions in my exercises, you can start using this discipline so that when it comes to the exam, you're not going to make mistakes. Another type is where the question asks state, in which case all this requires is a single sentence to summarize the point being made. Here I'll give you an example. State 4 benefits of using a product breakdown structure. So benefit 1, benefit 2, benefit 3. I've just given you here benefit 1. A product breakdown structure, and by the way, in the exam, at least once make sure that the examiner knows that this stands for a product breakdown structure. Helps to define the scope of the project. If a product is mentioned, it is within scope. If it isn't mentioned, then it would be out of scope. So in a very simple sentence here, notice I'm using a semicolon here, as it's a nice way of answering a question fairly quickly. Another exam type of question is where the examiner uses the word determine. This is a new type and will not be used on any exams before the 1st of May 2015. And this refers to a calculation type question. And therefore, a determine question will only be used for either a critical path type question, where you need to calculate the critical path or some aspects of it, or earned value management. Now, a determine type question will be used in conjunction with list and describe, state and or explain. But if you're taking the exam before the 1st of May, you will not come across any determine style questions. I just want to make a few points about the terms advantages, disadvantages and benefits. It's very important to understand this exam question terminology, as many delegates confuse them in the actual exam. So, for example, if a question asks you to state 5 advantages of a particular topic, what they're after is a positive perspective or an outcome or an understanding. Please be aware that an advantage is different to a benefit. Continuing, a disadvantage is seeking a negative perspective, outcome or an understanding of a particular aspect. And benefits, these are the positive aspects of having something, and you should not be answering the question by giving an interpretation of what the absence of a benefit may mean. In other words, if we didn't have this benefit, we couldn't do whatever. So make sure the word benefits is captured in a positive light. Now, you may think these 3 points are fairly straightforward and fairly obvious, but believe me, in an exam, feedback from the examiner is that certain candidates are misinterpreting this and losing a large amount of marks. Number 3, when a question asks about the benefits of a process, do not respond with the steps of the process. In other words, don't describe you do this, then you do that. It's what the benefits are. In all of my video modules that you'll be watching, I make it quite clear in the heading what the benefits are, or an advantage or a disadvantage. So you'll have plenty of choices to draw from when answering such a question. Where the question seeks benefits of a role, or benefits of a process, or benefits of a technique, the candidates need to focus upon the benefits, the upside if you like, the positives, not what would happen if that role was not present. Again, you may think that's a fairly obvious thing, but in the heat of the exam, some candidates are answering that wrongly, as described here. Displaying lists. You can, as I've mentioned previously, miss up to 2 marks per list item if you don't display them. You can do it either as a distinct list of the beginning of the page of your answer, or as a keyword or phrase at the start of a paragraph, as an initial statement, usually with a full stop. Displaying a list can be an underlined keyword or phrase at the start of the paragraph, or it can be a highlighted keyword or phrase at the start of a paragraph. As these 4 points make here, it's absolutely vital you show the examiner that you are displaying a list and what that list represents before you start giving the information. For list and describe type questions, name the list item, but add extra value when describing it. Again, I mentioned this earlier. There are marks allocated for naming the list as well as describing. Make sure you do both. Don't waste time providing a context before answering a question. You'll get 0 marks. The examiner knows what the question is about, so don't waste your time and energy writing it down. Just give the number of the question and start answering it immediately. You can use alternate terms or phraseology as long as it is applicable to the question. This is true, for example, when you're naming a project phase, particular tools or process steps or components of modules. Because I've spent many years teaching Prince 2, when it comes to answering a risk question, I would use the terms that Prince 2 uses, but making it clear exactly to the examiner in what sequence and what the purpose of each step is. If a question asks you what the purpose of some aspect is, then what it's seeking is the why within the answer. What is the purpose? Just building on risk as an example here, what is the purpose of carrying out an impact analysis? Then you're saying why you would want to use that. In other words, what value it brings, if you will. When it comes to change control type questions, it's important to focus on the purpose of change control. In other words, why do it, rather than what it just is as a process. In other words, the examiner wants to understand that you haven't just memorized the steps, but you understand why it's valuable as a practicing project manager. Your answer may include elements such as managing scope, costs, stakeholder expectations, risk, opportunity and threats. These are just examples that you may want to build into your answer. The key point here is like the similar green box here, is when you see the word purpose, it's asking why you're using it. When an advantage or disadvantage is asked for, give a positive or a negative statement depending on what they're asked for, not a statement about what the absence of something may mean. I covered this briefly in the previous slide, so hopefully that's fairly straightforward. Let's look at number 4. Understand the key steps in change control and do not confuse between requirements management and change control. Again, the examiner has found that in some answers, the delegate is confused between change control and requirements management. I make this point in my separate modules on each of these aspects, so do make sure it's clear in your head before moving on. When citing advantages or disadvantages, ensure your answer is unique to matrix management. Now, this piece of feedback comes obviously about an organisational question. And one of the ways your organisation may be set up, and I'm referring to the organisation, not the project, of course, is as matrix management. So when answering a question, when you're describing one of the organisational types and it's matrix management, make sure you keep your advantages or disadvantages relevant to matrix management and not one of the others. For example, an organisation that is structured via its departments or groups. Ensure that process steps are at a project level and do not answer a process question down at document level, for example, filling in forms, as these are not key steps. In other words, if you're answering a question on change control, then you talk about the whole process of change control at project level, rather than I would fill out this form, I would pass it to Jim would then check it, and so on. Those are not the key steps. And don't worry, of course, in the coming modules that you'll study, I've made sure that all key steps are shown at project level. When it comes to team roles, again, this particular topic would include the Belbin approach. Select and explain rather than recall specific role names. When you study this particular aspect, you'll notice there are particular names that Dr. Meredith Belbin has given for particular team roles. If you don't remember those, it's not a big deal as long as you come up with a sensible description that shows that you understand that particular role. A good approach here is to describe the positive and negative attributes of each team role in terms of project, team, and outcomes. Rather than simply memorizing team roles, just write briefly what each role's positive attribute is and a sentence on what their negative attributes are. Quality management, a few pointers here. When responding to continuous improvement, respond from a quality perspective and not a project perspective. In other words, talking about processes, tools, techniques and testing, etc., and not citing post-project review lessons and learned. Can you see the point here? Continuous improvement would indeed perhaps have projects holding post-project reviews and taking lessons learned. But if it's a quality question, you need to answer the question in terms of quality processes, quality tools, quality techniques and testing. Requirements management. When naming the steps, a variety of language is acceptable provided it answers the question. Now this won't mean a lot to you until you've covered the requirements management module, but the exam is not a memory test. It's making sure you understand what each of these aspects are. So you may use different terms when describing requirements management that would be perfectly acceptable and would indeed answer the question. Back to quality management. The examiner would expect to see content which includes using testing outcomes results from quality control and or assurance to take improvement actions, such as feedback to quality assurance, adapting processes, updating quality plans and control points. It really builds on this feedback above here about quality management. Make sure you keep to the topic of quality management and don't drift into general project quality. When it comes to particular tools, as Pareto analysis, Ishikawa and control charts, again within quality, there are blurred lines between quality control and quality assurance. Since, back in the real world, many organisations use the terms interchangeably. So please take care to cite these in context if that particular question comes up. Finally, again on quality management, focus on quality as part of the entire project lifecycle and not just down at task level. Again, you'll understand what that means when you cover my modules on quality management. Good. Well, that brings us to the end of some of the exam guidance feedback that the examiners have provided, and you should now have a pretty good understanding of what's coming. So let's start in Module 1 on our first topic, and it covers the definition of a project. I will, of course, always give official definitions whenever they are stated within the body of knowledge. So first off, a project is a unique, transient endeavour undertaken to achieve planned objectives. Meanwhile, talking about project management, since projects bring about change, then project management is recognised as the most efficient way of managing such a change. A good definition of a project is an endeavour in which human, material and financial resources are organised in a novel or unique way to deliver a unique scope of work of given specification, often within constraints of cost and time, and to achieve beneficial change defined by quantitative and qualitative objectives. Bit of a mouthful, isn't it? But inside it, it's actually giving you a very clear definition of a project. It's where we use human and non-human resources, including money, and they're organised in a particular way. Given the unique scope of work, scope means what's included and what isn't, so a project must be carefully scoped to deliver against a specification, All projects have constraints, time and cost being two, and the whole purpose of a project is not just to keep people busy, but it's to deliver beneficial change. That means benefits being realised at some point after the project is finished. And these benefits can be defined in quantitative, in other words, numerically, that this will increase the speed by 30%, or qualitative objectives. This is an easier process to use. Another definition of a project is a unique set of coordinated activities with definite starting and finishing points. Every project has a start and finish, therefore it's not ongoing. It's undertaken by an individual or an organisation to meet specific objectives within defined schedule, cost and performance factors. This is a quote from British Standards 6079, The Guide to Project Management. So let's now go back to what a project manager does within a typical project. The project manager must handle, juggle and prioritise many factors, including organising and leading teams in order to deliver the project. We'll learn in roles that there's a role called the sponsor. The project manager here is centre stage, juggling, if you will, the project benefits, the scope, the cost, the quality, time and risk. And all of these aspects are trade-offs that the project manager has to juggle. The output or outcome of the project is a given capability, and it's this capability, when used over time, will produce real benefits. These are the same benefits that are stated in the project business case, owned by the sponsor. Let's now look at project management challenges that you may expect to come across in a typical project, starting with people challenges. The project manager often needs to influence others without direct organisational authority. I mentioned about a matrix organisation earlier, and in such an organisation, the individuals that form the project team do not report directly to the project manager, but to their own line management. So the project manager will need to influence the team without resorting to, if you don't do this, I'll fire you, because that is not the case. Another challenge of people management is the project management and project staff and line managers all have different priorities. A line manager of, say, a group of electronic engineers would be prioritised by maximising the usage of all of their staff. That may, of course, be a different prioritisation to the project manager, or indeed the individuals themselves. Projects cause organisational change and affected staff may resist. In other words, if this is an internal project, perhaps some new computer system that needs to be used, it will almost certainly mean that those using the computer system or those affected by it may have different outcomes, and you may find that such staff resist the project. This could be a particularly bad problem if it's those same staff that you're using within the project to create the specialist products. Projects perform planning and risk management, which may be seen as pessimistic. Talking about the risks that a project will throw up may put some people off, and planning may show the high level of detail and timeframes needed, and these could be seen as pessimistic by people within the organisation. Let's move on to project management challenges within the technology used. Technical innovation may introduce risks, which in turn will affect delivery time and cost. It is the project manager's job to make sure such risks are managed and minimised. New technology can require increased staff competence and contractor reliance. In other words, bringing in a new system may need that those using it or operating it in some way will need to be trained further, and it may often mean that new technology will mean bringing in contractor skills simply because of internal skills are not yet available. Project management challenges in terms of process, organisational controls can frustrate and seem bureaucratic and or challenging to the project manager. In other words, delivering a project, it may well be that certain aspects of it must comply with, for example, an internal process or method of working. Organisational lack of control and or differing approaches can thwart the project stability that's needed. An example here is the project manager can see a particular approach that needs to be followed in implementing the project, and it may well be that the organisation does not have the sophistication of ensuring that approach can work, and therefore it may harm the stability of the project. Now a couple of slides looking at project processes and characteristics. First of all, a general picture here. You see, processes iterate as they are used continuously throughout the project. I'll show you that on the next slide. But taking each little step of the process, I'm now going to show you a generic model, if you will. Let's have the center stage here for the management of the project. As we go through at a micro level here, each of these has an input of some description. It might be a business need, a problem, or an opportunity, whatever. It's the trigger or input that is used for the management of the project. If this is used later on during the project, the input may, for example, be a specification that is needed to be converted into a product. But of course, the purpose of each of these processes is to produce some form of output, which will be the deliverable or a product or a service as a result of this particular aspect. We have constraints as well. Typically, these may be time, cost, or quality, or technical, or indeed any other performance parameters, such as legal or environmental constraints, and so on. And the management of the project must respect these and be successful given such constraints. So how does the work of a project get carried out? Well, these are called mechanisms, consisting of people, techniques, tools, equipment, or others within the organization. And this is a generic model, if you will. So the next slide, we're going to look at the top level processes. Consider that each of these will have some aspects of these 4 parameters within each process. Let's just remind ourselves that all of these outputs will go into business as usual, if you will, or business operations to be used, since, as we learnt in the previous slides, a project is there to deliver some form of change. Before we move on, let's just remind ourselves of the project characteristics. By its very definition, a project is unique. It has never been done before. Maybe a similar project has happened in the previous past, but this one is unique in some way. Otherwise, it would be manufacturing, wouldn't it? Another characteristic is a project is temporary. It has a beginning and an end. A project does not go on forever, even if it seems that way sometimes. A project has a predefined outcome, because if it didn't, we wouldn't be able to produce a plan and deliver against that plan. That outcome, of course, needs to be known before any planning is done, and certainly before any work starts on creating the products. Risk. Every project has risk because it is unique, it's never been done before, and it delivers change. And whenever we change anything, there are risks involved. Every project, therefore, has risk in some way. There is no such thing as a risk-free project. Every project is unique, and therefore some projects are more risky than others, but there will always be some element of risk. It's therefore important that the project manager needs to understand how such risk must be managed. Products, a general word here meaning the output or outcomes. Sometimes you'll see the word deliverables, but it's the same as product. A deliverable is anything that the project delivers. A product is anything that the project produces. So they're 2 terms meaning exactly the same thing. Management and teams. Every project will need to be managed, and every project will have teams. Even the smallest, simplest project you can imagine will have 1 or 2 people working on it. Of course, teams are within the project, but you'll also need to deal with users and customers external to the project, but those which are necessary in order for the project to be successful. So management and teams are a core aspect or characteristic of any project. Let's now look at the bigger picture, still keeping to project processes, but looking at the entire project life cycle. So a typical project life cycle would start off by creating a plan, getting that approved, of course, carrying out the plan and monitoring progress against it, and by virtue of that progress, taking corrective actions or controlling it whenever necessary. If this is happening in a typical project, the original plan will often need to be replanned in some way. For example, as a result of taking some form of controlling action, you may find that a schedule or a duration or the work or the cost of a task or a phase, if you will, needs to be updated, in which case replanning will need to take place. So this cycle continues throughout the project. So a project life cycle consists of a number of distinct phases, and each phase needs to go through its own project management phases, as I'm about to show you. It's important that you remember these terms here. The initiation phase is also known as the concept phase. This can often happen pre-project. It's where the project is started off and a top-level understanding of what needs to take place is considered and documented. The next phase is called the planning phase, and it's here where you would produce the project management plan. Again, notice that each of these phases are often cyclic, as shown by my little sketch here. The planning phase is also known as the definition phase. Do remember these terms: concept, definition. The next phase is where the work is being carried out, and what the project manager is doing is monitoring and controlling. The name of the phase is implementation, and very often an implementation phase is split into optional stages. You may have a top-level design stage, a testing stage, an implementation stage, a sign-off stage, whatever, but just be aware that the implementation phase often is split down into optional stages. The final phase is the closing phase, and this is called handover and closeout. Again, there will be some form of iteration taking place, but the word handover refers to handing over some or all of the project's products to their user operational area, and may occur several times during the project. It may occur once at the end, or a mix of both. You'll learn about a phrase called business as usual, BAU. This refers to an operational area, if you will. So now focusing on the definition of project management, it's the application of processes, methods, knowledge, skills and experience in order to achieve the project objectives. The general term of management is the process of leading, planning, organising and controlling the resources of the organisation to achieve stated goals as productively as possible. That's a great general description there, and you can see how that harnesses one-on-one into project management. Project management is the process by which projects are defined, planned, monitored, controlled and delivered, such that the agreed benefits are realised. Please be aware that realising benefits may take weeks, months or even years after the project has been completed. However, if partway through a project some products or deliverables are passed to the operational area, then some benefits may be realised during the project life cycle, but that would be the exception rather than the rule. So project management is also called the controlled implementation of a defined change. And here's our friend, the project manager, again centre stage. The project manager will carry out planning, which is creating the project management plan, getting that plan signed off, and then monitoring and controlling progress against that plan. If you have a project with several stages in it, you may have the project plan representing a high-level view, and the project manager would produce stage plans prior to approval to go into that stage, in which case the project manager is still planning, monitoring and controlling. Of course, one of the biggest challenges here is actually managing the team, as we've previously mentioned. We need to not just lead them, but also motivate the project team. There will, of course, be a module showing you exactly how leadership and motivation occurs. So let's now go through a brief slide showing how you might apply project management from the beginning through to the end. I'm using very generic language here, deliberately so. The first thing you'd want to do is to capture the requirements of the project, reminding ourselves that project management, again, is the process by which projects are defined in the first place, planned, monitored, controlled and delivered so that agreed benefits are realised. You may have gathered by now that this is quite an important phrase for you to remember. So first step, capture the project requirements. Next up, prepare the business case. This is often owned by the project sponsor or senior management. However, it's often the case that the project manager will create this or prepare it on behalf of them and get them to agree that what's been written down is what they're expecting. We'll learn later that the business case is in effect weighing up the benefits on one side of the equation against the costs and risks of running the project on the other, and making sure that the benefits are worth the effort and risk. It's important to have that agreed at the beginning so that we know that the project will indeed deliver a viable outcome. Develop the project management plan. The project manager will be doing this, assisted by many others using their information and experience, for example, to make sure the plan is realistic and achievable. That needs to be signed off, so we need to secure corporate agreement and necessary funding to start work on the project. Again, as I've said, these are very generic descriptions of the steps we'd go through. We need to build and motivate the project team. They may well already have been identified in the plan, but here we need to have them assigned to the project and get them motivated and keep them motivated. That's one of the project manager's responsibilities. We need to maintain communications with all other stakeholders and the team, including senior management, because of course they own the business case and they will be expecting regular communications to keep themselves informed that the project is still on track to deliver the benefits they're expecting. The project manager will need to monitor and control progress against the plan. How does the project manager do that? By comparing actual results against those planned, and if they differ in any way, taking some form of corrective action. That's the control aspect, if you will. The project manager needs to manage risks, issues and changes. When it comes to managing risks, this includes identifying them in the first place, agreeing appropriate responses, and making sure those responses are carried out and having the desired effect. A difference between an issue and a risk is that an issue has already happened and needs to be dealt with in some way, whereas a risk is something which may or may not happen at some point in the future. A change is really a specialist form of an issue, and it is where a change to what was originally agreed has been requested. It's important, of course, that we don't merely implement those changes just because someone's asked for it, but that a proper impact analysis is carried out and the appropriate authority agrees whether that change should go ahead or not. The project manager's job is to manage the costs against the budget and to make sure that the project or its stage or phase can be delivered within the budget as laid down. Ultimately, the purpose here is for the deliverables of the project to be handed over. To whom? To those who will use those deliverables to deliver benefits or realise benefits, if you will, at some point in time. Having handed over the deliverables and of course got approval that those deliverables are acceptable, then the project needs to be shut down in a controlled manner. This will include releasing the staff, passing over lessons learned, archiving documentation, and so on and so forth. So let's quickly review the benefits of project management. In the earlier work I've covered already on feedback from certain exam questions, you'll remember that benefits are positive outcomes of having successful project management in place. I'm going to give you a few ideas here. Remember that a typical exam question may ask you for, say, up to 5 or 6 examples, so I'll let you choose ones which you find most easy to remember. Here we go. Having project management in place brings clarity about the product deliverables and their criteria. In other words, the quality criteria, if you will, of what the deliverable should be, how it should function, what it should do, and so forth. Without project management involved in the change, then it's likely that such product deliverables will not be exactly understood, but worse, to be understood as different things to different people. Project management brings order, structure, and discipline to each unique undertaking, the project itself, of course. The project manager's job is to structure the project in terms of the workforce, the phases and stages, bring discipline so that everyone knows how they need to behave, what they're responsible for, what their authority levels, and so on and so forth. Also, project management brings order, structure, and discipline to the management of change. In other words, helping such change from beginning to end to be successful. Project management reduces risk because it's being managed and increases the probability of the desired result emanating from the project itself. Very often, individuals will identify areas of risk but do nothing about it. But because the project manager is ensuring that it is actively managed, then the probability of such risk occurring will be reduced, and the benefits being realised from the end products are more likely to occur. Project management provides a greater likelihood of achieving the desired result, a somewhat similar point in which I've made here. Project management defines accountability. The project manager is accountable for project delivery and the sponsor for benefits realisation. There's a great temptation in normal organisations to lump everything on the project manager. Remember, you cannot be accountable for something if you do not have the power and authority to be responsible for it. And it's therefore clear to carefully delineate these two important roles: the project manager for delivering the project and the sponsor for ensuring that over the passage of time that benefits are realised. Project management gives you a closed-loop monitoring and control system by virtue of the stages and phases I've talked about earlier, and therefore again enhances the probability that the project deliverables will indeed be delivered on time and to budget. Project management introduces appropriate processes, tools and techniques. These would be processes, tools and techniques not normally found in a typical organisation, because a typical organisation is not normally there to deliver projects. Projects, if you will, are a special case, and therefore we need to use project-specific processes, tools and techniques. Project management satisfies the needs of the stakeholders. One of the main responsibilities of the project manager is communication and making sure all of the stakeholders' expectations are carefully managed and monitored. Project management assures efficient management and the best value use of resources. In other words, we've got the right people at the right time, no more and no less. And this, of course, refers to non-human resources as well, such as equipment and facilities, tools, and so on. Project management sets up appropriate roles and responsibilities within the team so that everyone is absolutely clear about what they're responsible for. One of the first actions of the project manager is to define exactly what the responsibilities for each role is and which individuals are responsible for carrying out each role and responsibilities. And finally, project management allows the provision of knowledge and assets post-project. One of the things that the project manager will do throughout the project is to collect any lessons learned. And as an absolute minimum, at the end of the project, these lessons and important data, such as the knowledge such as how long certain estimates really took, and this can be used to aid future projects. Without project management, that would be unlikely to have occurred. Let's then look at the causes of project failure and some of the barriers against project management. Starting with failure causes. Projects can fail due to many reasons, and one of them would be poor or inadequate planning. What we mean by that is not sufficient level of detail or no planning at all. A project can fail due to the lack of a viable business case. Remember, I said it's a balance, if you will, comparing the benefits of carrying out the project against the time, risk and costs of carrying out the project, to show that the project is delivering the right end products which will realise the benefits. Without a business case, you couldn't know whether the project was going to be successful or not. Another major point here is that often projects are called failures simply because a business case wasn't in place, and indeed the project was a success by any measure. But the fact that the end product wasn't needed, or it was the wrong end product, or what have you, is really a failure of the business case, not necessarily of the project. Another cause of failure in the project is not engaging with all stakeholders, managing their expectations throughout the entire project. Poorly defined products and outcomes. Remember, these are also called deliverables. If each deliverable or product is not fully understood, then when it's finished and delivered into the operational area, it won't be exactly what was needed, and therefore not defining it properly in the first place will cause the project to fail, either completely or at some level or another. Another failure is that of poor estimation, finding that tasks or activities take longer than expected, or cost more, or both. These factors can cause end date to slip out and for costs to escalate. Lack of quality control, knowing what controls to apply, knowing what quality criteria each product is, having a system in place that measures and tests before a product can be seen as acceptable and complete. Insufficient progress control and tracking, only finding out we're behind too late to do anything about it. A project manager will make sure that progress control is done in a timely manner, and this means tracking information, comparing it to the original plan and taking corrective action or control when needed. Without this in place, that's another cause of project failure. Insufficient measurables. This starts off with understanding what the requirements are, transforming those into functional or specifications, and then delivering those against products which will have their own quality criteria. Also, insufficient measurables refers to tracking and control of the project itself. No definition of roles and responsibilities, so that everyone is confused about what they should be doing, is an absolute cause of project failure. And not having a change control in place. Changes are almost inevitable. Every project I personally have ever worked on have always had changes requested at the very minimum and often asked to be implemented. Well, without a change control process, where everyone understands what needs to be done, who has authority for saying yes or no, proper impact analysis done so that an informed choice can be made about whether to proceed and implement the change or otherwise. Without that in place, you'll have the infamous so-called scope creep, where a project gets bigger, more expensive and later, and often with bloated features that no one really needed or wanted. Variable management support. The project manager, although responsible for making sure the project is successful, will need support from management at key points throughout, when escalating certain problems or issues, or when used as an authority to implement a change, or when having an important milestone or review against progress. And when, of course, when things change, when extra resources, for example, may be needed, you need to have management support in place the whole time, not necessarily spending every second and every moment with the project manager, but being available when needed. And insufficient resources, the biggest problem of all, often coming back to poor estimation and inadequate planning, by the way. We need to have the right resources in place, and if those resources aren't available, then really the project plan should not be signed off in the first place. So what are some of the barriers we might expect to projects? Well, lack of project policies, plans and processes. If an organisation is using project management as a method of delivering change, it should have these in place. And if they're not there, then this in effect means the project manager has to invent all of this stuff and create it from the very start. No project support resources. The project manager may end up doing everything themselves, but smart organisations often have a project support office in place and key resources with skills and knowledge relevant to the type of project. So these can be drawn upon when a project is planned and implemented. No appreciation of project management benefits. If you don't know what it can bring, then you wouldn't use project management and therefore have a team driving themselves, which could result in failure. It's certainly a barrier to project success. Lack of senior management support. That's a barrier I've covered already in terms of a failure cause having variable management support. No training, guidance or career path for project staff. In other words, people are put on projects and it's not seen as a good move because there's no career path and therefore morale can suffer and inefficiencies arise in the use of such staff. Change needs to be managed. That's a barrier that in and of itself will cause project failure, as I've already discussed over here. And lack of decision making, having the right people in the right place to make decisions at known and agreed points. Change control, stage reviews, signing off plans and so forth. And staff empowerment. It's important that the project manager is seen as a leader and as someone who manages the project team. But by the same token, the team should feel empowered to get on and do their job and not feel that they should have to ask permission every 5 minutes. I just want to quickly touch on business as usual, often called BAU. It's the absolute reverse of projects, if you will. So business as usual is described as the normal day-to-day business processes and operations within an organisation. These are often routine and ongoing. An example of business as usual might be, for example, a departmental manager or the head of a group. They are providing some internal service or function, and they would be seen as business as usual. A business as usual function, if you will, is there to manage issues and problems on a daily basis. They're there to meet performance targets. Their focus on value for money, and hence, for example, driving through efficiency and productivity and giving customer satisfaction. Here their customers might be other internal groups. These, if you will, are the guiding lights of a business as usual manager. So let's then look at projects. We know that already that they're unique and finite. They have a beginning and an end. They're revolutionary in that they haven't happened before and they're there to deliver change. All projects have risk and uncertainty. The team involved in it, since the project is temporary, will also be temporary. They'll be assigned to some part or all of the project while it's ongoing. When the project closes, then they return to their line managers. By the very nature, projects are a dynamic and changing environment. Let's now compare that to business as usual, often called operational management. This is repetitive and ongoing. It's evolutionary. In other words, it's doing the same thing smarter and better and evolving to become more efficient and productive. It builds upon cumulative experience of all those within that particular business as usual area. It consists of a permanent workforce there because of their knowledge, skills and experience to optimize the products and services that business as usual department or group provides. So it's a stable and fairly predictive environment. Can you see the contrast and compare between business as usual and projects? I'm sure that's fairly clear to you. Well, that brings us to an end of the first module on project management within the APMP Project Management Qualification Primer, where you've covered the benefits of using project management, the challenges, and the difference between project management processes used throughout the project and the phases of the project lifecycle. I'm Dave Litton. Thank you for your company and attention, and we'll meet together again on the next module. And don't forget to carry out your exercises. Bye for now.